Hey everyone, Brian Zane here with another classic pay-per-view review as nominated by my Patreon backers. This week we take a look at the height of the hubris of the nWo in WCW by looking at nWo Sold Out. This is from January 25th, 1997 at the Five Seasons Center in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. This show was nominated by Matthew Panic and Chase over on patreon.com/wrestlingwithregret. Guys, thank you so much for picking this show. It's the first and the only nWo-themed pay-per-view in WCW history. Soon you will understand why that's the case. Very similar in concept. When you look back at it, it's a very similar idea to what we know today as the single-branded pay-per-views, the brand split, the Raw and SmackDown exclusive shows. Very similar like this because they tried to take the nWo and played with the idea of turning it into its own brand separate from WCW. So that's what they were trying to do here, was testing the waters with that. Now, I think y'all know the general idea, the story of the New World Order and what happened. At Bash at the Beach 1996, Hulk Hogan turned heel, joined forces with Scott Hall and Kevin Nash to form the New World Organization, later the New World Order of Wrestling, brother, and it has caused this unprecedented wave of popularity and prosperity for WCW. You know, everything was up. Business was great for WCW at this time while the World Wrestling Federation was suffering, and so the stable was also growing and growing, adding new members all the time. So WCW was trying something new by giving them their own show. Now, the kayfabe reason that they have their own show here in January 97 is because the nWo won War Games at the Fall Brawl, which justifies why they're here. You know, just when you look at it from the base level, it seems kind of counterproductive to have like the nWo, which is this heel faction, hosting this pay-per-view because they glorify the nWo and they put all their guys on a pedestal, and so it's all heels and it's run by heels, and it's like the aesthetic is very heelish as well, and I'll get to that in a second. But you know, you wonder if it's kind of counterproductive because is it supposed to be well received by the fans? Are they supposed to be treated as heroes? Are all these fans here, you know, like nWo for life, or is it, you know, WCW fans who are trying to just watch a WCW show? Full disclosure, in my research for this episode, I did listen to both What Happened When with Tony Schiavone and to 83 Weeks with Eric Bischoff, and it is a total coincidence, by the way, because I didn't even realize that Sold Out 97 was going to be the latest episode of 83 Weeks that dropped as I was researching and as I selected this pay-per-view. So total coincidence, you know, what are the odds? Very convenient for me because I got to hear what Bischoff had to say about this show. Neat little piece of trivia here. This show took place on a Saturday, not Sunday like most pay-per-views. The reason being that one day after this, on the 26th, was the Super Bowl, so they wouldn't compete against that. And also this show took place 1 week after the Royal Rumble in 1997 in San Antonio. This show was not only called nWo Sold Out, but it was actually a legit sellout. Over 5,100 people packed the Five Seasons Center in Cedar Rapids. The show got about 107,000 pay-per-view buys, a .47 buy rate. Now, I can't believe I've made it this long in the review without mentioning it, but this show happens to be considered to be one of the worst pay-per-views WCW ever did for a variety of reasons. Now, Bischoff on his podcast tried to justify a lot of the decisions he made on the show when he was talking about it. He takes blame for a lot of stuff that happened on the show and like why it didn't work out the way he envisioned it, but he stands by a lot of the decisions that he made in the first place. Like he stands by the reason and the justification for those things to happen. One of his things he harped on a lot in his defense was he was trying to do the opposite of what, you know, you expected in wrestling, because the nWo is all about counterculture. So try and make a show built around that idea, and we'll see how that works in a little bit. You know, he says this show is a means to an end. This was not a show designed to have blow-offs like traditional pay-per-views do. This is more just kind of like what he said, laying the groundwork, laying the foundation for an nWo brand. And so that was kind of his rationale for a lot of the decisions that were made on this show. And we'll see how it plays out. The show begins with a pre-taped package of the nWo arriving to the arena on a fleet of garbage trucks in the snow with a police escort. We then go live to see Eric Bischoff center stage at the podium. He tosses to a promo of Hogan, Hall, and Nash on the big screens before we officially get our commentary team of Bischoff and Ted DiBiase, Trillionaire Ted, who of course is at this point was considered the kayfabe bankroller of the entire nWo enterprise. Now Bischoff, of course, has experience as a play-by-play man. He was like the guy. He was like the the straight man on the announce team for a long time in WCW before turning heel and becoming, the evil mastermind behind the New World Order. But he definitely leans heel in this show. It doesn't really get overbearing and intolerable until like the last 3 matches or so. I think for the most part for the show, he's actually pretty even keel. He does lean heel sometimes in the commentary. It's not as bad as you might think. It's nowhere near as bad as, say, heel Michael Cole a few years ago. Maybe closer to the end, Bischoff's definitely in that territory. That's because the bigger stars are there with the higher stakes. But during the more preliminary matches and stuff, I think he does a fairly good job. He and DiBiase do a fairly good job putting, the WCW talent over, even if they're not nWo. Like when they do a good move, they call it out, which is great. But one thing that these two do not have is chemistry. They're not a very good team together, are Bischoff and DiBiase. They're not good at banter. When you're between matches, they don't really know what to say at times. It's very awkward. So I give them credit for not going full-blown heel until the end of the show. But yeah, one thing I think they needed to work on was more of their chemistry. Our opening match is Chris Jericho versus Masahiro Chono, the former NWA World Champion and the first international star to join the New World Order. Jericho, along with every other WCW wrestler on this show, gets no music, no lights, no pyro, very bare bones, just to try and really amplify the difference of these WCW guys, we don't like them, but here's nWo because they get music. All the New World Order guys get music and lights and all that stuff. It is the same theme played for everyone, save for, the Outsiders and Hogan, so you do hear the same theme play a lot throughout the course of the night, and it gets kind of annoying. The disembodied ring announcer, when the WCW guys come out, the voice kind of runs them down, kind of puts them down, makes them sound like crap. And then, of course, they glorify the nWo guys. That voice is the voice of Neil Pruitt, who was a producer for WCW. He did all the voices of that same voice for all those nWo promos back in the day going,
The following announcement has been paid for by the New World Order.
Your referee for the match and for the entire show is Nick Patrick, the sole nWo referee. He's got the nWo shirt and hat and black jeans on, super heelish. So he's reffing every single match on this card, which sounds crazy, but I've worked a few indie shows over the years where there's always been just one referee refereeing every single match on the card, and at any level I can imagine, especially in big time WCW stuff, that has got to be a really tough task. I do not envy Nick Patrick at all in that situation. Some of the Miss nWo contestants are sitting on bikes at ringside watching the show, and hang on to your seat, folks, because we're going to be seeing a lot of those ladies throughout the show. A lot. It's going to be really special. You're going to love it. As the match begins, we see some WCW talent head to their seats. You see Arn Anderson, Brian Knobbs, Harlem Heat and Sherry, Meng and the Barbarian, Deborah and Mongo McMichael. And as the match begins, Chono starts out strong, hitting Jericho with suplexes, a diving tackle off the top rope. They go to the outside and Jericho begins a comeback, but Chono cuts him off. Chono begins working the knee, and then we get a USA chant. Now, keep this in mind. You've got a Japanese wrestler versus a Canadian wrestler, and you have a USA chant. Wonderful. When Jericho finally does get a pinfall on Chono, Nick Patrick does a lazy 2 count. You can tell he's very biased against the WCW guys. I think it gets a little more even keel. I think he just gets tired as the show goes on. So his slow count really applies to everyone, whether it's WCW or nWo. We also get our first look at the stick cam, which as the whole show goes on, you see these 2 guys on either side of the ring with these giant sticks and these little cameras attached to it with a curved lens. So you get this different angle of the match. It looks different, I will say that, and I will agree, I'll admit there is some level of innovation to that, because, we've seen in more recent years when WWE puts a little camera in the top turnbuckle post, and you see that angle as well. It's always cool to see wrestling companies try different things, but sometimes the tried and tested works. This was different, and I applaud them for that, but it looked super low budget because the camera quality was not the same as the regular cameras you had, the hard cam or the other floating cameras. A bit of a botch off the top rope by Chono. The collision looks pretty sloppy. Chono tries to put Jericho through a table on the outside, but Chris gets his big comeback. Jericho goes to the top rope. Chono knocks him off, and Jericho goes to the table on the outside. Chono hits the Yakuza kick to win the match. I give this 1.5 stars. It was a pretty slow match. I was really disappointed because I love Jericho's work, and I've seen enough of Chono to know, hey, on paper, these two could put on a really good match. It was not. And I think a problem with this match, and like I mentioned, it's going to go out the whole show, not a lot of heat. There's no build. There's no storyline for really any of these matches, save for a couple of them. And so this suffers as a result. We get the first of many segments involving the contestants for the first and only ever Miss nWo pageant that takes place during the show. It's really one of the hallmarks, the cornerstones, if you will, of Sold Out 97. It's what a lot of people remember this show for good or for bad, mostly for bad. The whole premise is it's a beauty pageant featuring these women, these average women of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And that's one of those things that Bischoff said in this podcast where it's like he wants to do the opposite of what's expected. Instead of getting these, fit, curvaceous, traditionally beautiful women, young women, they bring in all these, biker moms, basically, these biker mamas coming in with their leather vests and everything, average looking, that sort of thing. That was the whole thing they were going for here, because the nWo is about, average, I guess is what they're going for. It's really weird. Again, very counterculture in that way. One of the biggest issues for this segment, and I think the biggest issue I have, is a lack of preparedness. No one is prepared. Nobody can hear anything when Jeff Katz, the host of this, by the way, who we'd never seen before or after this segment, by the way, he is the host, and he asks the ladies these questions, and the women don't know what to say. They often repeat each other when they're asked similarly suggestive questions, and it just goes on, and it goes. And I'll be telling you when these segments happen, but just know it goes on way too long. No one knows what to say. It's super awkward every single time. Our next match is a Mexican death match as Big Bubba, who's better known as Big Boss Man, takes on Hugh Morrus, who's accompanied by Jimmy Hart. Now, you might be asking yourselves, why do we have a Mexican death match in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, featuring absolutely zero Mexicans? Well, the reason is Hugh Morrus was actually a last-minute replacement for Conan, who's a much more convincing, much more reasonable opponent for Big Bubba in this Mexican death match. But Conan couldn't make the show because he had travel issues stemming from a booking he took in Mexico right before this event. So he couldn't make it. Hugh Morrus was put in his place. The object of this matchup, it's basically a last man standing match where if you don't answer the 10 count by the referee, you lose. And that's basically what we have to work with here. This is just a big hoss fight, lots of big clubbing attacks. Bubba hits Hugh with a pair of low blows. He tries to handcuff Hugh to the ropes, but somehow Hugh does a switcheroo, handcuffs Bubba instead. Eric Bischoff on commentary completely misses that. The chain, I think, also breaks on the handcuff, so Bubba's got to try and pretend he's still handcuffed to the rope as he gets clotheslined over the top to the outside. Bubba brings out a chain and knocks out Morrus and whips him with it on the back. Morrus comes back, he hits the no laughing matter moonsault. Bubba's out, but Nick Patrick takes forever to try and count him. He's just taking the longest 10 count in history. But Hugh keeps the pressure on. Hugh produces a foreign object of some kind. Can't quite tell what it is. He hits Bubba with it. They keep fighting. Hugh with a low blow of his own. They fight to the outside and on the stage. Hugh goes for the moonsault off the steps, but he misses. Bubba grabs a motorcycle from the bottom of the ramp, rides up the ramp, and hits Hugh Morrus with the motorcycle. Morrus is down for the count, and Bubba wins the match. I'm going to give this one a half star out of 4. It's a not so great brawl. It doesn't flow very well. Mistakes were made. It's a bit of an ugly matchup, and it just didn't work for me. We go back to the ladies of Miss nWo. Jeff Katz asks some more suggestive questions. We get some more boring answers.
What would you do to be in one of his movies?
Whatever it takes.
We get our first real shot of some of the biker moms dancing in the shadow boxes on stage. Apparently this goes on for a while in the show, and it's barely noticeable. And even when you do get a clear shot of it, it doesn't look very good. There's these very faint shadows on the shadow boxes. Our next match is Jeff Jarrett versus Mr. Wallstreet of the nWo. Jeff Jarrett, of course, is of the Four Horsemen at this point. Now, Jarrett is a natural heel, and I think anyone who watches this stuff would tell you he's far better as a heel than a babyface. So, perfect heel. But he's supposed to be, I think, a babyface by default because he represents WCW. And of course, he wears his typical Jeff Jarrett outfit, which is so designed to get people to boo you. No babyface wears an outfit like that. And so maybe he should have worn something else on his way to the ring for this matchup here. And of course, he still wrestles as a heel in this matchup, which is not helpful because he's wrestling another heel in Mr. Wallstreet, or VK Wallstreet, I think was his name here. This was Mike Rotunda, formerly known as IRS. He got brought in the NWO. Why, I have no idea, because no offense or disrespect to Mike Rotunda, but this was during a period in time where they were just like putting everyone in the NWO, whether it made sense or not, whether it was an idea to draw money or not. We just need more bodies in the New World Order. Jarrett does his heel stuff to Wallstreet in the ropes. He goes for a running attack into the ropes, but Nick Patrick pulls Wallstreet out of the way and causes Jarrett to take a tumble. We get a lot of shots of Deborah in the crowd here. She's sitting next to her husband, Steve Mongo McMichael of the Horsemen. The action spills to the outside, fighting into the crowd. We get some dueling sleepers as Deborah brings Mongo to ringside. Wallstreet with the chinlock on Jarrett, but Jarrett mounts a comeback. Jarrett with the figure 4 leg lock on Wallstreet, but Nick Patrick once again drags Wallstreet to safety, drags him toward the ropes, being that crooked referee. We get an abdominal stretch by Wallstreet here, and that's when Mongo gets on the apron and decks Wallstreet with a briefcase. Whose briefcase was that? Where did he get it from? It's never really addressed. But anyway, he costs Wallstreet the match. Jarrett pins Wallstreet, and basically Mongo intimidates Patrick into counting the 3. So Jarrett scores the first win for WCW on the night. I'm going to give this one 1.5 stars out of 4. It was a match that was wrestled competently, but it was just weird because it was heel versus heel, and because of that, it never really was allowed to get out of like first or second gear. It was a match that was on the cusp of being interesting and being decent, but it never really got past that. After another riveting Miss NWO segment, we go to Scotty Riggs versus Buff Bagwell. The American males explode. Back in late November, Eric Bischoff issued an open call to anyone in WCW who wanted to turn over and join the NWO. Bagwell jumped at the chance, beat up his former partner Scotty Riggs, and became a heel for the first time in WCW. That's what brought on this match here, and it's actually the first one we get all show where there's actually some heat to it, and there's a story before this thing, preceding this actual match, and it makes sense to have them fight here. I love Buff's selling and his trash talk in this matchup here. He gets caught in a suplex, and before Riggs tosses him, you just hear Buff go, "Ah!"
Hits the brakes, belly to belly super.
Riggs throws Buff out of the ring. He dives onto him as well, but Buff then cuts him off. They fight on the apron, and Buff knocks him off again. Bagwell's got Riggs in a camel clutch for a long time. Riggs eventually gets him on his shoulders and drops him on his back like electric chair style. Big bump by Buff there. Riggs makes a comeback, hits Tornado DDT. They're fighting on the top rope. Buff knocks him off and hits the blockbuster for the win. It's the first time we've seen that move done that would go on to become Buff's finisher, and so it's cool he busts that out here in this matchup. I'm going to give it 2 stars out of 4. Like I said, I'm glad that we finally have a match with some heat behind it. Probably the best story told all night at this point, but in terms of overall quality and excitement, it's a match that I would put squarely in the middle. But so far, it is the best match of the night. We get our 4th Miss NWO segment, and boy, live TV, it's something, ain't it?
Would you be willing to dress up with Vince? And if so, what would you wear?
I can't hear you.
Our next match sees Diamond Dallas Page take on Scott Norton. Now, DDP at this point is beloved, but hey, according to that sign, Scott Norton is cool. In what was probably one of the biggest moments of DDP's career at that point, just a week or two before this, Page famously rejected the NWO's offer. He put on the shirt, but then he hit Scott Hall with the Diamond Cutter, dumped Kevin Nash out of the ring. So this really was probably one of the biggest jumping off points that really solidified Page as like the biggest babyface in the company for a while at that point. DDP is feisty and crafty the entire time of this match. So Norton is obviously stronger than Page, but DDP's got to be quicker. He's got to find different ways to take Norton down. DDP with a face buster, but Norton recovers, lays him out with a clothesline, and then in the middle of the match we see it's Sting up in the crowd. Not so much the rafters, just the crowd. It's Sting. Well, hi Sting. Nice to see you there, buddy. Norton works over Diamond Dallas Page some more, overpowers him throughout. Page is able to trip Norton up before hitting him with a diving clothesline. Page hits Norton with a DDT, signals for the Diamond Cutter, but out come Buff Bagwell and friends. They come down, they surround Page in the ring. Bagwell's got a microphone, and basically he offers Page to join the NWO once again. And so Page is like, yeah, okay, I'll do it. It's fine, I'll join. And so he puts on the shirt, he's posing with everybody, he's so happy. Then, of course, he shakes hands with Scott Norton, boom, hits him with the Diamond Cutter. He beats up a couple other guys, he runs off into the crowd, tears off the shirt. Oh, the NWO got skunked again. When will they ever learn? By the way, Nick Patrick awarded Norton the victory by countout. I give this match 1.5 stars. I'm going to take it down a notch because of the silly ending. Because after what happened when Page rejected Hall and Nash, Why would they think he would accept a mid-match invitation to join the NWO after that point when he's on top? That's a very weird strategy there. So anyway, yeah, it was an okay match, but the ending kind of took it down a notch for me.
Look at the two dog-faced Michigan mutts, Mongrels Rick and Scott Steiner.
We then go to the WCW Tag Team Championship match as Hall and Nash defend against the Steiner brothers. The Scots begin this match first. Hall starts working Steiner's back, which they say is like, in kayfabe, it's supposed to be his weak spot, but he certainly doesn't sell like it is. But then Steiner fights back with a pump handle slam, Rick with a DDT to Nash, and the Steiners look good early on. Rick with the power moves on Nash, but Rick gets dumped to the outside and almost lands on his head on the apron. Hall and Nash take turns taking their shots on Rick, but Rick keeps digging down deep to kick out of all this offense. Rick hits Nash with a low blow while Scott distracts the referee. Scott Steiner with the hot tag, he's a house of fire. The Steiners go for a double team move, but Nash bumps into Rick, and as they all fall down, Nick Patrick is caught in the crossfire. Hall hits the outsider's edge on Scott, but Patrick's still down. Where's the referee? Rick hits Hall with a bulldog while he doesn't see it. Rick drags Scott onto Scott Hall. The important distinction. Scott Steiner is dragged onto Scott Hall. Randy Anderson, who's been sitting in the crowd, he's a referee. He runs into the ringside area. He administers the count. So the Steiners win the match and become the new tag team champions. And Bischoff and DiBiase are just incensed. And they stew over this for another like 10-15 minutes in the show, well into the next match. But yeah, this is the really big win for WCW on this show. I'm going to give this one 2 stars out of 4. It was an okay match. Like, nothing about this match, except for the finish, really like made me go, oh my God, it's amazing. The finish was interesting. It certainly woke the crowd up. Again, just down the middle for me in terms of quality and story. Now, I said this was the biggest win for WCW in this show, but of course, it would all be stripped away come Monday because Bischoff would fire Randy Anderson from WCW as a referee. He would strip the titles from the Steiners, give them back to the Outsiders. And of course, this whole thing with Bischoff and Randy Anderson would carry on for several weeks. And it even it led to one of the biggest, one of the most heelish things you'll ever see in wrestling, where Pee Wee Anderson brings his wife and his children with him to make a personal appeal to Bischoff to get his job back. And Bischoff goes, "Kids, will you tell your daddy he's still fired?" Like, oh my God, what a sleazy heel moment for Bischoff. Probably one of his best heel moments of all time. In our semi-main event, we've got a ladder match for the U.S. Championship as Eddie Guerrero defends against Syxx, better known as X-Pac. Now, I say Eddie Guerrero is the champion, but you can see Syxx with the belt because he stole it from Eddie Guerrero sometime before. And wow, that belt looks huge on Syxx there. It's like the biggest belt I've ever seen him wear. And Jesus, this match is the polar opposite of everything we have seen in the show so far. It has actual, fast-paced action. It's exciting. There's, genuine athleticism, not just big guys picking shit up and putting it down. What a breath of fresh air this match was compared to everything else we've seen so far. Some great stuff from these guys. Guerrero's pushed up the top rope, does a backflip onto his feet, and he takes a spinning heel kick from the top rope. Syxx with a huge suplex to Guerrero to the outside of the ring. Syxx grabs the one ladder at the top of the ramp for this matchup. God, it's crazy to think there was a time where we had ladder matches where there were half a dozen ladders just set up outside the ring to start the thing. It's one ladder at the top of the stage, and that's all you get. If you break it, you're fucked. Eddie makes a comeback, uses the ladder as a weapon. It eventually backfires on him, but the crowd is firmly in Eddie's corner here. It's one of the loudest chants you'll hear all night is the chant for Eddie Guerrero. Syxx tries to recreate the ladder squash spot from WrestleMania 10, but Eddie dropkicks the ladder onto Syxx. We get a big superplex from that. Eddie and Syxx are at the top of the ladder, and Syxx with a dropkick to Eddie. Wow, that was crazy to see that there. Back on the ladder, Eddie gets knocked off, but he knocks Syxx off the ladder in the rebound. We eventually have a tug of war at the top of the ladder over the belt. Eddie hits Syxx in the head with it. The belt falls to the ground, which I'm not sure was planned, because Eddie, as soon as that happens, he jumps down the ladder, grabs the belt, picks it up, and Nick Patrick awards him the match. I get the feeling that Eddie was supposed to hold on to the belt after hitting Syxx with it, but be that as it may, Eddie retains the championship and gets the physical belt back in his possession. I give this one 3.5 stars. Easily the best match of the night, but they could have even worked at half speed and been better than what we saw for the rest of this show. Like I said, the complete opposite of what we've seen so far. Actually, interesting spots and great moments. This is a great match, and really, it's the shining beacon in this entire show. Finally, after all the waiting and the gnashing of teeth, we get the finale of Miss nWo. Who's going to be crowned the first and only ever Miss nWo? Well, first, Jeff Katz introduces the contestants by their name, which is a first. It took them long enough. We get these like graphics to take up the entire like one side of the screen, but like the camera's not prepared for it, and the women don't know what the fuck to do. They walk up, and like some of them don't know when their cue is to leave. It's super awkward. This is just like one of the biggest clusterfucks I've ever seen in like a high level, top tier wrestling promotion. To have this level of uncoordination is just, it's spellbinding. I am gobsmacked at how shitty this whole thing is run. My favorite part though is when they show the graphics on the side, they have like quotes for some of the ladies, and one of the ladies, her quote is just, "Shut up, you brats," because she's a school bus driver. I'm sure she says that a lot. Eric Bischoff comes out to ultimately pick the winner. He boils it down to two of the women, and he kills some time by asking the finalist a secret question. Only they can hear, and then only he can hear the answer that they give. So he ultimately picks number 7, the one who cooks bratwurst and French fries as her hobby, as the winner. He makes out with her as pyro goes off. I wonder if she still has that sash and the metal tiara at home. She like does a lap around the ring, sits on a toilet throne, which is so symbolic of not just this segment, but the show thus far. This goes on for a very long time. And like I thought I was praying for death in the last Miss nWo thing. This, I was like, oh my God, like I couldn't hit fast forward enough times on the network to get past this thing. God awful stuff. What were they thinking? We now go to our main event as Hollywood Hogan defends the WCW Championship against the Giant. The Giant, who was a member of the nWo at the time, won the World War III Battle Royal to earn a shot at the championship. So when Giant made the perfectly reasonable request for a championship match from Hogan, they kicked him out of the nWo. And my favorite part about the intro for this match is, like I mentioned earlier, how the disembodied voice would rag on all the WCW guys during their entrances. He introduces the Giant as the nWo's biggest failure they ever had. Well, that's not true, because this show, I think, would count on that list as well. So Hogan makes his entrance. He's flanked by members of the Dallas Cowboys. Why they're here in Cedar Rapids, Iowa? I have no idea. Must be a pipeline state or something. Anyway, Giant opens up with some chops, but Hogan gets the advantage when he jumps on Giant as he gets back in the ring after a chase. Big clothesline by Hogan takes them both down, but Giant recovers and is on the offensive. Giant knocks Hogan and Vincent's heads onto the guardrail outside when the nWo tries some chicanery. I think Hogan's going for a small package at one point, but Giant just catches him, picks him up, slams him down. Hogan powders out of the ring, but then throws some powder in Giant's face. Chokes him with some wrist tape, but Giant immediately fights back. He's like, his selling is not great in this matchup. So he gets Hogan back in the ring, stretches his back out. Giant goes to top rope, he goes for a picture-perfect looking diving elbow drop, but he misses. And this was something I noticed a lot with like his time in WCW. He would go to the top rope and he would miss, or he'd hit the wrong guy. If you got a guy that big who can do that shit off the top rope, why would you have him miss? That seems such a wasted opportunity, in my opinion. The Hulkster hits the big boot, but it does not faze the Giant. Hogan body slams him, hits the leg drop, but Giant gets right back up. This should be a big moment. It feels like a big moment, but it is not a big moment, ultimately. We get a bad-looking choke slam from the Giant. Giant goes to cover, but Patrick refuses to count the 3. It's like, Hogan's down. He's clearly not getting up, but Patrick says, oh, 2 count. Oh, the shoulder got up. So Giant gets pissed, hits a choke slam on Nick Patrick. He's finally done for the night, God bless his soul. We get a choke slam for Bagwell, one for Vincent, one for Wallstreet, one for Big Bubba. Hogan hits Giant with a guitar while he's choke slamming Syxx, but Syxx takes the bump anyway, so it's not like he was saved at all in that process. So yeah, Giant, he kicks out, or he gets up from the leg drop, the boot doesn't faze him, and they totally waste this moment here. So you see Bischoff, DiBiase, they get up from their announce desk. They, Hall and Nash, all they make their way to ringside after all the goons got killed. We get a big "We Want Sting" chant from the crowd. A couple of times. We do not get Sting on this show. So they beat up Giant some more, spray paint on his back. Hogan poses with the belt. The nWo celebrates as we fade to black. I'm going to give this match a 1/2 star out of 4. I mean, I don't think it's a full-on 0-star match on the level of like Sid versus El Gigante from Super Brawl 91 or from Hogan Jarrett from Bash to the Beach 2000. This was an actual match that was given time, but ultimately had a weak story and a shitty finish. If I'm being honest, this really should be like a 1/4 star of match, but my fractions don't go that low. And yeah, also the fact that it's like this is your main event and it ends on this down, no contest, and this is how the show ends. Like, this is not a good endorsement for like the nWo as a brand. It's like, come look at the nWo and see what we have to offer. Bullshit finishes. My final grade for nWo Sold Out 97 is an F+. The F is for fuck this show. It took me 2 days to get through it. The plus is for the ladder match with Guerrero and Syxx because it's literally the only thing about this show worth going back to watch if you care at all about decent matches. But however, if you are a fan of schadenfreude and unprofessional looking television and just the shittiest content you can imagine, then by all means go back and watch the Miss nWo segment on this show because it is just mwah! It is the peak shit when it comes to shit in wrestling. I want to hook that shit up to my veins. And you know, like I said, the ladder match was great. Everything else in terms of wrestling wise was like at best meh, and everything else was trash. Like distant second is, you know, DDP and Norton or Bagwell and Riggs, but that's not even enough to put on the pro side of this grade graphic here. You know, there are a lot of good workers on this show. I have to say that, but there's a lot of stuff about this show that's just not working in their favor. This show is like everything wrong with the New World Order in a nutshell, where they got so big and so popular, they could do no wrong, they can get away with everything. They can bloat the roster, dominate the storylines, never lose the big battles and so forth. You know, and this is what you get as a result of that hubris. Like I said at the very top of this review, I understand what the desire to try and turn the nWo to its own brand because it was so popular. And on one level, I can understand Bischoff's perspective in his defense that it was a means to an end, meant to be an experiment, but it failed. There's often a reason that the things that are expected in wrestling are expected because a lot of the time it works. What makes this show so much worse in hindsight was how they fucked up the end of Starrcade 97 at the end of the year. Because that was supposed to be the big blow-off. That was the whole reason why Sting was gone for so many months. He was going to swoop in, be the conquering hero, knock Hogan off his perch, and become the new champion, and WCW would finally get the big win after the nWo runs a roughshod across the company for months and months. But, and I'm sure I'll get to that when I review Starrcade 97 in full, and I've said it before on this channel, how they fucked up that finish so badly, with Hogan getting the standard 3 count on Sting. Brett restarts the match, so the match ends in controversy. Sting wins the championship, but then he vacates it right afterward. They have to fight for it again at Super Brawl 98, but by that point, you've already killed your momentum. So had Starrcade 97 ended the way that I think was more ideal, then I think that, you know, I could have tolerated the bullshit of Sold Out 97 and really a lot of 1997 stuff a lot more if the ending of Starrcade 97 went in a better way. Whoo doggies! Well, I certainly hope you enjoyed this review of nWo Sold Out 97. I really enjoyed getting to finally vent my frustrations out about this show. Thanks once again to Matthew Panic and Chase for nominating this show for me to look at. If you want to play a role in determining which classic pay-per-views I review, be they good, bad, very much like this one, or somewhere in between, go to patreon.com/wrestlingwithregret, become a $10 backer or above, and you'll have the chance to nominate classic shows for me to review in the future. Next time on this segment, I do want to get one Royal Rumble review in just before the month of January is over. So in 2 weeks' time, I'm going to review one of my favorite Rumble pay-per-views. That's the Royal Rumble 2000. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.